by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
It is budget day, of course, one big story in town. The Chancellor will unveil what he calls his budget for growth today, with a £4 billion free childcare scheme making up part of his plan to tackle the country's continuing labour shortages. Good news for parents. We'll dig into what it might mean for you.
And all the drivers will want to see reduced prices at the petrol pumps. Well, we already know that Jeremy Hunt's going to extend the 5p cut in fuel duty.
It's not enough, though, is it, for motorists? It can't all be good news. Of course it isn't. There's a planned rise in corporation tax from 19% to 25%. It's due to come in from the 1st of April. It could lead possibly to the closure of small businesses. We're going to look at exactly who it will affect.
And why are the Tories putting taxes up? That's the question we'll be asking too. The United States also has accused a Russian jet of recklessly bringing down an American drone over the Black Sea. This is causing real diplomatic fears between the two superpowers.
And also this morning, we're going to be having a couple of guests in the studio. Charlie Mullins is going to be here and your mate, Kevin Maguire.
They won't agree. And also a former advisor to Donald Trump. I'm fascinated by that because what's Trump up to?
Let us know your thoughts on the budget today. We've got a special this afternoon. We are, of course, building up to it and really focusing, aren't we, on what it might mean for people, the money in your pocket.
Yeah. I don't think you can get too excited, though, because I don't think it's going to mean a lot for your pocket.
No.
Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
First, though, here is the news with Bethany Elsey.
Bev and Andrew, thank you. Good morning. It's 9:32. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Jeremy Hunt's first budget as Chancellor will include a major expansion of childcare support, aiming to increase the workforce and boost financial growth. There are reports the plan will include 30 hours of free childcare for 1- and 2-year-olds in England. The budget will include a series of other measures to deal with labour shortages, such as encouraging the over 50s, the long-term sick and disabled to get back to work. Announcements on benefits, reform and pensions allowances are also expected, but it's understood the Chancellor will resist calls from Tory backbenchers to cut taxes. The energy price guarantee will be extended for a further 3 months as part of the today's budget announcement, the Treasury has confirmed the support with energy bills will continue from April to June at its current level. It means average annual household bills will stay capped at £2,500 per year. Thousands of workers are walking out on what could be the biggest strike day this year. Teachers, junior doctors, tube drivers and BBC journalists are taking industrial action over issues including pay, jobs, pensions and conditions. Schools Minister Nick Gibb is urging the National Education Union to pause the strike action so serious negotiations with the government can go ahead. And the Defence Secretary says Moscow should respect international airspace after Russian jets collided with an American drone over the Black Sea. Ben Wallace says the Americans think the incident is very unprofessional, with the White House accusing Russia of recklessly colliding with its drone. The incident raises fears of an escalation between the two superpowers, with a senior Russian figure calling it a provocation. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB, digital radio and tune in. This is GB News. Now it's back to the point with Andrew and Bev.
Well, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt's going to finally set out his first ever budget. It's at 12:30 p.m. today. We're going to bring you it live here, of course, on GB News.
We expect this free childcare, apparently, for working parents in England will be expanded to cover 1- and 2-year-olds. The plans are part of a government drive to encourage more people back to work to boost economic growth. I'm not sure it's that simple, to be honest.
No, and there might also be a rise in tax-free pension. In fact, there is going to be, because we know it. It's going to be, you can go up to 1.5 million from 1.1 million. The chances of increasing the lifetime allowance, which means you can put more in your pension pot before paying extra tax.
Fuel duty apparently is going to be cut. The cut could be extended on fuel duty. It could be frozen for a year. The government cut the tax, if you remember, by a measly 5p in March, but it's due to end on the 31st of March.
And, of course, businesses are going to be watching the budget because he's going to announce 12 new investment zones across England. Each will be backed with £80 million of funding. And, of course, that rise in corporation tax is looming. Or will that be the white rabbit in the hat?
OK, well, let's get... Didn't know we had that little graphic there.
Very nice one,
Oh,
too.
You've splashed out today, GB News. Brilliant. Well, it is a big day. Ben Glaze is here, Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Mirror, to join us. Good morning, Ben. First of all, can I ask you, Andrew and I were just discussing, why is it that the days of the budget being announced, when the bloke would come out, the Chancellor with his little red suitcase, and it would all be very exciting, why do we know so much detail so early these days?
I think in years gone by, there were lots of announcements in a budget and only one made a headline. And the government got quite frustrated, this is previous governments as well, quite frustrated that lots of the good news that they were in a budget wasn't getting on the tea time news, wasn't getting on the 10 o'clock news, and other announcements were being squeezed out. So what we've seen is a sort of drip effect now of good announcements, as the Treasury would see it, in the days leading up to a budget, so you sort of dominate the headlines and get those good news stories out. I think that's what the government's thinking.
The Speaker of the Commons, whoever it is, and currently it's Sir Lindsay Hoyle, before that it was the completely ghastly John Bercow, but nevertheless, they think Parliament is sacrosanct and major announcements relating to government business should be done in the Commons. Is Sir Lindsay Hoyle going to be happy about this?
Well, Sir Lindsay Hoyle will not be happy about this whatsoever. You know, it's not just the budget. There are various government announcements that are made either through leaks to newspapers or in press conferences or in set-piece statements where Prime Minister might go to a naval shipyard, for example, to announce something about shipbuilding, doesn't do it to Parliament first. And certain parliamentarians, and particularly the Speaker, gets very upset about that. So I think either before Prime Minister's questions today, when Sir Lindsay Hoyle will be in the chair for that, he might say something there, or for the budget, it's actually his Deputy Speaker, who's the Chairman of Ways and Means, that's Dame Eleanor Lang. She might say something, and she's even more ferocious than the Speaker, if anything. So I think there will be a reprimand for the government today, but ultimately there's not a lot that the Speaker can do about it.
But they're sidelining Parliament, and already people have such a low bar for Parliament and for politicians. And if you just diminish its role in major state occasions like the budget, it's No wonder people don't give a hoot about parliamentarians.
Well, I tend to agree with you. Things like this should be announced to Parliament first, but then obviously as a journalist we do...
Yeah, there is that.
So,
there is that.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy
But we're being manipulated, really, aren't we? We're
yeah.
being manipulated via the press.
Yeah. Yeah.
to hear the good bits first, and I don't think that sits particularly well with the public. Let's have a little bit look at the detail of it, Ben. What are the standout issues for you? Because it feels a bit like a tinkering budget. They're sort of messing around with the little micro things. There's no huge announcements today.
That's right. There's not a huge amount of money to play with. In fact, there isn't. But the two things that the government will want to focus on is that extension of the energy price guarantee. So from April, average annual bills were due to go up to £3,000. They're actually going to be kept at £2,500. The energy price cap is £3,280. So if it had gone up to £3,000 over the course of a year, you'd pay, on average, £500 more. So that's going to be kept at £2,500 for another 3 months. The other thing is this big announcement on childcare. Now, that did come out sort of late afternoon yesterday. Unclear whether that was a deliberate leak or that was something that the Chancellor wanted to reveal as the rabbit in the hat this afternoon. But that's a big deal. So it's going to be 30 hours a week for the parents of 1- and 2-year-olds, free childcare. Currently, that exists for 3- and 4-year-olds. But to do it for 1- and 2-year-olds, that's a big move to try and get parents back into work.
But at least one of the parents has to be working 16 hours a week.
That's right, yes.
So there are caveats.
There are caveats to it. The idea is it'll get more people back into the workplace and address some of the labour shortages that have been hampering the economy over the past 18 months or so. I think there's still 1.2 million vacancies. The thing that's not going to be announced alongside that is a move to sort of try and get more of the over 50s back into it. Now, we are expecting something on that, but dealing with the long-term sickness, NHS waiting list, that's key to getting some of those over 50s back.
Do you know why some of the over 50s aren't back at work? Because they're doing the childcare. This is where I think they needed to be a little bit more original with this thinking on childcare, because a lot of parents of newborn babies, you know, on 1 to 2, which they are effectively, you know, new babies, they don't necessarily want to put them in nurseries. And I do wonder whether the government could have done something a little clever in terms of allowing you to pay a family member.
Granny
daycare is huge, and that's why a lot of people over 50 aren't going back to work, because they're helping out their youngsters. It just feels a little bit unoriginal. We'll just throw money at the problem.
Yeah, it is. I think as well, one thing that's interesting is it's going to take away from Labour, because Labour have been working for months and months on a big childcare offering. Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, did a speech last week to a Tory-aligned think tank, didn't give any details of what she was actually going to do. And now, of course, any ideas might have been stolen. They're going to be overshadowed.
We're hearing, by the way, Ben, that Cabinet's arriving at number 10, so they're going to be told what's in the budget statement, even though most of us know what's in the budget statement. If they've been reading the papers, they'll know what's in the budget. Suella Braverman's just gone in, apparently, the Home Secretary. Andrew Mitchell, the International Aid Minister, and I'm just trying to think who else we've seen going in. But going back to Bridget Phillipson and Labour and the childcare, the problem about being in opposition, if you come up with good plans, the government can nick it.
That has always been the problem. Remember about 10 years ago, Ed Miliband and the blank sheet of paper? Well, part of the reason it was blank was because they didn't want to write down their ideas, because they'd be stolen by the government. But then, on the other hand, should good ideas, surely you want them to be implemented. Does it matter?
But you don't if you've been in opposition for 13 years and you think you've got a great vote winner and that pesky Prime Minister pinches it. Remember the tax on the energy companies? That was a Labour plan. Tories nicked it.
Well, actually, Lib Dems would have it.
Lib Dems
originally.
And, of course, they don't get a look in, do they, here?
Not at all.
They're completely squeezed out the picture as the third party.
Do you think... were we expecting him to do any sort of windfall tax on these fuel companies? Like you say, they're going to keep this supplemented bill, effectively, was what it is. But there are a lot of people who would say, well, hang on a minute, we don't want the taxpayers to be funding this. We've still got massive profits with the oil and gas companies.
The government would point to the windfall tax that it's already implemented. I don't suspect we'll see a new windfall tax today. In fact, if anything, the government, you know, it's being billed as a budget for growth by Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. I think what they want to do is focus on, particularly with the lifting of the corporation tax rate, that's angered so many Conservative backbenchers. You know, this was penned in, this was done by Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor. It's still going to rise from 19% to 25% coming into effect next month. But they were going to want to emphasise, the government, the investment breaks that they're giving to companies, whereas if they spend money on new machinery, better factories, they'll get a 100% tax break on that investment.
Which is all right, but look, the fact is we are saddled with the biggest tax burden in 70 years. Now, Labour, your lot, your paper supports, they normally like that. But this is a Tory government, Ben, and they're now about to stick another great big tax on us.
Well, certain Tory backbenchers are saying, you know, if the Conservative Party is not for low tax, what is it for?
Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, takes that view.
Exactly.
She told us only last week.
We travelled to Paris with the Prime Minister last week for his UK-French summit with President Macron, and he was actually asked about low taxation, and he gave the answer we all expected. You know, in general, of course, he supports low taxes, but now's not the right time.
No sign of it.
No. The irony is, of course, this morning I was hearing quite a few left-wing commentators applauding this budget.
The world's gone mad.
The world has gone mad. We saw it in the Hancock WhatsApps. I can't remember who the actual civil servant was who said this is a very conservative and used it as a pejorative term.
Yeah, I know.
With a capital C, very conservative ideology.
I think that was the Cabinet Secretary.
It was the Cabinet Secretary.
Simon
That's
Case.
who it was. Yes, it was Simon Case who said, and he used it as a pejorative term. Like, you know, where has conservatism gone,
I ask it a lot, as one who struggles to support the Tories at the moment. Polls, though, have shown, Ben, no doubt, a narrowing of Labour's lead. I think the Tories have had quite a good run. I think he's done well on the Windsor framework. He's done incredibly well, I think, on Stop the Boats. Had a good meeting with Macron. With the President of the United States. We're going to talk, remember, the Shadow Cabinet about that a little later. And the polls lead is now narrowed to about 11%. Now, a few years ago, Tories 11 points behind Labour would be a state of national mourning, but that's a lot better than where they've been before.
They've really narrowed over the past few months. With you know, Rishi Sunak, when he came in about 5 months ago, the idea was boring government and gently narrow that 20-point lead that Labour had built up with all the shambles of Liz Truss's premiership, and he has succeeded in doing that. I think what is key now in the 18 months or so before the election is delivery, because, he has talked a good game, Rishi Sunak, but you haven't actually seen the effects of any of it yet. You know, we've had the Windsor framework, we've had the deal to stop all the illegal migration bill on stopping the boats. You haven't stopped any boats yet. You need to see what happens in the delivery.
All right, that's Ben Glaze, Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror. Now we're going to cross over to Downing Street, where the Cabinet are getting ready to talk about the budget. Our Political Editor Darren McCaffrey's there. Darren, what is the atmosphere going to be like in Number 10? They're still way behind in the polls. 11 points is still a long way behind in the polls. This budget's got to start turning round public opinion, and yet there doesn't appear to be too much, apart from the childcare, as a sweetener.
Yeah, I've been told essentially this budget is going to be a kind of steady-as-you-go budget, if you like, that we're not expecting massive fireworks, but it is quite troubling for the government in that regard that this is probably the last budget before the election in which you could have a significant impact. Clearly there will be one more before that election, which is probably going to happen in either the spring or autumn of next year, but really if you want some kind of big fiscal events to kick in properly, it needs to happen today. But as I say, given the economic situation we find ourselves in, with inflation still relatively high, with the scars of that mini budget, Andrew, just 6 months ago or so, what Jeremy Hunt cannot afford to do is to spook the markets again or cause any sense of crisis, and that is why he's going to stick to the pretty disciplined messages we've heard from him and indeed from the government, as I say, really since they took over from Liz Truss. Just a little bit of trivia, or history if you like as well, because the Chancellor's going to come out of here, isn't he, in about 2 hours time before heading to Parliament. He's going to hold up that red box as he does, you know, that image when he holds it up to show everyone he's got the budget speech and he's off to Parliament. That comes or dates back to 1869, when the then Chancellor, who I think was 21 stone, was a guy called George Ward Hunt, had forgotten his speech. He went the whole way to Parliament and realised he'd left the speech here in Downing Street, and ever since then the Chancellor has got into this habit, if you like, of holding up the box to prove that they've got the speech and they're on the way to Parliament and they haven't forgotten it.
Whose budget is it, though, Darren? Is it Jeremy Hunt's or is it Rishi Sunak's? Because he is a former Chancellor, he's steeped in the city all his life. Who's really written this budget, in your view?
You know, Andrew, that's always a question, isn't it? You know, when you look back at kind of politics in the past about who really is in charge. You know, I think this time round, it is fair to say that Rishi Sunak clearly will have a big impact on this. But remember, Jeremy Hunt was Chancellor before Rishi Sunak became a Prime Minister. I mean, Rishi Sunak really needed Jeremy Hunt. He couldn't afford to move him from that post, given the situation the UK was in. But yeah, you without a shadow of a doubt, as a former Chancellor, you know, Rishi Sunak will want to have his fingerprints all over this. And both of them are relatively kind of similar people, aren't they? They're quite cautious in their approach to politics. I wouldn't say either of them are massively ideologically driven to a large degree, and I think this budget will reflect kind of that, in the sense that it might be relatively boring. As you guys have just been talking about, we know a hell of a lot of what is already in it. I think the key thing for the politics in all of this comes around to taxation, because what we're going to see is we're going to see tax essentially go up, particularly corporation tax, to 25%. Now, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will argue that's still the lowest in the G7, but it is going to be a big jump. Now, there are clearly going to be mitigations to that. Will that be enough for the Conservative right? Will that be enough for the people who supported Liz Truss? And also, this is already in place. We know that millions of more people are going to start paying tax in the year ahead, simply because it's going to be dragged in to those higher income tax thresholds, because the thresholds have been frozen. And again, there'll be real concerns within the Conservative Party, far from being conservative, that the tax burden on the entire population is only increasing yet again, and about how sustainable that is, not just in terms of the economy, but also in terms of the politics of this, given the fact that this is meant to be a Conservative government who traditionally are meant to be the party of low taxation, not record high taxation.
And we've got a few Cabinet Ministers been arriving there, I think, Darren.
Yeah, Cabinet's underway, as is always the way here. As you say, they will get a sense, they'll get to finally go through the budget. Despite all the leaks and the questions you were having there about what happens in Parliament, actually many members, in fact, most members of the Cabinet don't get to see the budget until now, literally a couple of hours before it is announced, to try and prevent any leaks. I think the big question is there going to be a rabbit? There probably will. We're not entirely sure where that's going to land. Maybe it will be in a substantial cut to fuel duty. It was cut by 5p last year. But in the end, what the government's trying to do here is two things. Focus on growth, that big thing that Conservative politicians have talked about for a while, but it's been pretty stagnant in this country. Those investment zones, those talk about mitigating that corporation tax rise, but at the same time also trying to tackle the cost of living crisis. So that's why you're seeing changes to childcare. The big question is, will it be enough, Andrew? That is the big question. Will it be enough to turn around that tanker in order to convince people that actually things are going to be better? Can it take on that Labour mantra that when it comes to the next election, do you feel better off than you did in 2010 when the Conservative Party first came back into government?
Yeah, very good point. Thank you, Darren. Darren McCaffrey there at Downing Street. Now we're joined by somebody that knows a thing or two about budget and how to run a business. The founder of Pimlico Plumbers, Charlie Mullins, is also with us in the studio. Good morning, Charlie. You sold your business, was it October 21? And you did very well out of it, and you worked blimmin' hard to build up that company. What is it like now for somebody running a business like you, and what would you have needed in the budget today?
Well, you certainly need some incentives, more and more incentives, and the best one I think I'm noticing here is the childcare one, which is going to allow many people to come into work, and I think that's going to sort of really be a major... That for me would have been the one that would have made a lot of difference, because we employed many females in the office and out on the tools, and there was always issues with the childcare, the cost of it, the unreliability of it. So I think that's going to be the biggest plus there. The downside, undoubtedly, is increasing corporation tax. That is just a crazy thing to do. From 19 to 25, many businesses will just not push forward on the basis that they're going to be hammered at the other end. Any incentive in the budget is going to be good. The other great one, I think, is the pension one, to allow older people to carry on working. I think that's a marvellous move. I mean, if I'm being honest, what I'm hearing is probably the best budget from a business point of view I've heard, other than the one of the corporation.
I wonder if that's maybe the industry that you came from, providing a plumbing service. I'm thinking about, imagine this would have affected you. I'm thinking a lot about the hospitality industry. I'm looking all the time for what are we doing for bars and restaurants and pubs who are really struggling, and they would love to see a VAT reduction.
Well, of course, I mean, any incentive will help any business. And, I mean, I could write a list of things that would be good for it. I mean, lower the tax rate for many people, and certainly lower it for... You're signing there,
I guarantee, Charlie, he will freeze the duty on pint of beer and he'll stick up money on wine because he thinks beer, well, that's red wine. Such a stupid, old-fashioned cliche.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I say, look, they're giving you the carrot, but the big stick is quite heavy. And I mean, it's good that they're doing something, and I think it's going to be a good budget for that because it's going to get so many more people back into work, and that's what we need to get the economy going. We've got to get the economy going, and the only way to do that is to get people into work. All their money comes from businesses, so he needs to look after businesses.
The corporation tax rise, we think, is going to only apply to companies with a turnover or profits of more than 250,000. So that will not impact on smaller businesses. But if you wanted to expand...
Well, it's the investment. I mean, you know, you've got to make profit to invest. And the fact that I think he's giving, you know, 100 mils worth of tax deductions in investments, but you've got to make the money to invest the money, haven't you? So it's all catch-22 situation.
I wonder whether this investment in terms of your infrastructure and your capital build within your company, whether it's factories turning out, you know, whatever it is, nuts and bolts, whatever. But I just wonder whether he's putting enough money into people. I know that's a bit of an old-fashioned thing to say in this technological age, but, you know, giving a company massive tax breaks in order to build a huge amount of hard manufacturing industry, I wonder whether he should be putting something to employ more people. Do you know what I mean? There's a slight difference. And you would say, well, you need people to run those machines.
You could cut the employer's national insurance contribution. They might take on more staff.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's all about employing more people. So whatever you can do to encourage people into the workplace is a good thing, and not penalise them. That's the problem. They penalise successful businesses rather than encourage them.
Yeah. Well, we'll know soon. 12:30. You're staying with us, Charlie, because I think you're reviewing the papers with my old mate Kevin Maguire.
You're right. Your old mate.
Mirror, my
Kevin,
old mate.
Yeah.
It's an old mate of yours, isn't it? Ish.
He's all right, Kevin, yeah. He can have a row with
He's your colleague, isn't he? Ben Gates, bit of a Daily Mirror takeover today, boys.
No, looking forward to it. I mean,
yeah.
Not had a row for
Don't hold back. You won't hold back, Charlie, when you see Kevin, will you?
You're right.
No.
Ben, let me just ask you what... obviously, to some extent, this is a cost of lockdown budget, is what we're dealing with here, isn't it? This is why we have this enormous hole that we have to fill. If Labour had been in power during the pandemic, all they wanted was more lockdowns, more restrictions, more schools closed, more furlough, throw more money at the problem, have more fraud. We'd be in a worse position, wouldn't we?
I'm not sure that's necessarily how Labour would have it, Beth. The idea that...
I think she's right, Beth.
We've got £400 billion that cost the country. You know, I think that would have been the case whichever party was in power, because the measures that were implemented, you know, they were necessary at the time. There's a lot of sort of lockdown revisionists who think, you know, well, we could have done things differently. Well... You know.
He did want us to lock down sooner, and he wanted the second lockdown quicker. And when it wasn't happening, he was accusing the Prime Minister of being reckless with people's health. That was Labour leader Keir Starmer.
I think one of the things that's interesting when you look at the international comparisons is a lot of countries obviously did things slightly differently in terms of how they implemented lockdowns, when they did it, how long they lasted for, how tight they were. And a lot of countries have come out looking quite similar. What Britain... The biggest problem we've got, of course, is because we had a quick reopening after the third or fourth lockdown. Boris Johnson made a big thing about us having the fastest growth in the G7. Well, the thing is we've now got the slowest growth in the G7 because we front-loaded ours, whereas now we're lagging behind the rest of those industrialised nations.
All right, Ben Grace, we're going to go to some of our emails that are pouring in from viewers and listeners. The first one comes from Edward, who says, slash government spending and defund foreign aid. Yes, we're giving... There's a story in the paper today, Bev, that 250 million or 2 billion we gave to India over 6 years never reached any development targets. Why are we giving any money to India? They're developing their own space programme.
That does seem crazy, doesn't it? Laura has said, I want to see a fuel duty reduction. As a lot of motorists would agree with that, Laura. Yeah. Emily says, abolish green taxes and reduce corporation tax.
And finally, for now, Neil says we must have more support for small businesses. Well, I'm not sure there's going to be much for that.
I'll tell you what is quite good in this. It's something, again, we should never have to be paying it, but to keep swimming pools open in leisure centres, about 300 million quid, because so many of them were hit so badly during the pandemic. Obviously, he may not focus on that, given Rishi Sunak's story about his own swimming pool.
I think he had to do it because he's spending all that money improving the electricity supply to keep his outdoor swimming pool nice and warm. So, there'll be jokes from the Labour benches about that.
Yeah, just a bit. Quite right, too.
Sure.
We're going to have more from your budget bucket list, excuse me, before the end of the show.
But up next, we're going to be joined by the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade. Very excited about that, Nick Thomas-Symonds. And we'll see what Labour wants to do in the budget. And he's also much more vexed about what the Prime Minister was up to in the United States with President, what's his name? President Biden.
Yeah.
I'm doing a Biden. I've forgotten who he was. You're here with Bev and Andrew on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Good morning. This is To The Point with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. You've been getting in touch already this morning with your views on the budget. Margarita said childcare should be integrated into primary schools. Why should the taxpayer have to pay for private nurseries? We're going to be getting to the bottom of all of that.
So he's going to unveil, Jeremy Hunt, what he calls his budget for growth with a £4 billion childcare scheme. How do you do a budget for growth when you're putting up taxes? But will that childcare scheme be good news for mums and dads?
And there is a bit of relief for drivers, not a lot to be honest. Jeremy Hunt's plan also includes a 1-year extension to the paltry 5p cut in fuel duty.
However, it can't be all good news because that plan drives in corporation tax. It's still, we think it's going up, we're certain it's going up from 19 to 25%. Remember Jeremy Hunt in the leadership contest last summer, where he came last, said the corporation tax should be cut from 19 pence to 15 pence.
So what's he up to? And also this morning, the United States has accused a Russian jet of recklessly colliding with an American drone over the Black Sea. It's a breaking story. It's developing all the time, this, but does it highlight the pressing need for more spending on our own defence?
And of course, we've got in the studio a former advisor to Donald Trump, who'll no doubt have strong views on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email address, as always. But first, let's get all the news headlines with Bethany.
Bev and Andrew, thank you very much. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Jeremy Hunt's first budget as Chancellor will include a major expansion of childcare support, aiming to increase the workforce and boost financial growth. There are reports the plan will include 30 hours of free childcare for 1- and 2-year-olds in England. The budget will include a series of other measures to deal with labour shortages, such as encouraging the over 50s, the long-term sick and disabled to get back to work. Announcements on benefits reform and pensions allowances are also expected, but it's understood the Chancellor will resist calls from Tory backbenchers to cut taxes. As part of today's announcements, the Treasury has confirmed the energy price guarantee will be extended for a further 3 months. The support with energy bills will continue from April to June at its current level. It means average annual household bills will stay capped at £2,500 per year. But Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says there are still holes in the budget.
There's more that needs to be done on workforce with reform of the apprenticeship levy and some other changes there. And I also think that we need more certainty and stability in policy. We've got to fix some of the holes in Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. We've got to bring all these together in a big, ambitious, long-term growth plan. And I think apart from the individual measures, that's the thing that seems to be missing from what's been leaked and pre-briefed about this budget so far.
Thousands of workers are walking out on what could be the biggest strike day this year. Teachers, junior doctors, tube drivers and BBC journalists are taking industrial action over issues including pay, jobs, pensions and conditions. Schools Minister Nick Gibb is urging the National Education Union to pause the strike action so serious negotiations with the government can go ahead.
We could be having those talks about pay, about teacher workload, about recruitment and retention. That's what we want to talk about. But the National Education Union, if they want to show good faith in those negotiations, they need to pause a strike action. And its strike action is no way to conduct a pay dispute. It inconveniences parents and families, and it's disrupting children's education after 2 years of having their education disrupted during the pandemic.
The Defence Secretary says Moscow should respect international airspace after Russian jets collided with an American drone over the Black Sea. Ben Wallace says the Americans think the incident is very unprofessional, with the White House accusing Russia of recklessly colliding with its drone. The incident raises fears of an escalation between the two superpowers, with a senior Russian figure calling it a provocation. Meanwhile, MPs here have urged the Prime Minister to get serious about enforcing sanctions against Russian oligarchs. Former Labour Minister Liam Byrne says there were 147 reports of a breach of the sanctions last year, but only 2 fines were imposed, totalling £86,000. But the US has issued 17 penalties since the start of the war, with a value of more than £35 million. A Foreign Office minister said the Treasury will look at publishing a list of those who've been granted exemptions. Some breaking news in the last half an hour. 3 men have been arrested after a drive-by shooting outside a church in London in January. One of them, 19-year-old Alrico Nelson Martin, has been charged with possession of a shotgun with intent to endanger life and 6 other counts of intent. He'll appear at Willesden Magistrates Court later today. The 2 other men have been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. They remain in custody. 4 women and 2 girls aged 11 and 7 were injured in the incident. A 48-year-old is still undergoing treatment in hospital. A health regulator has criticised ambulance handover delays at hospitals after one patient in the West Midlands waited almost a day in the back of an ambulance. The Care Quality Commission warned delays in handing patients over at hospitals means paramedics can't attend other calls. It also warned long delays pose an increased risk for patients. West Midlands Ambulance Service says they recognise the impact delays have on patient health and that there's been a significant improvement in tackling delays. More than 300 academics have signed a joint letter against what they call the government's unworkable migrant bill. The scholars claim the policy is not evidence-based, workable or legal under current human rights laws. They're also warning the bill will not stop small boats from crossing the channel, but increase and cause more deaths. The Queen Consort has met a young ballet dancer set to star in a Disney documentary. Camilla met the 13-year-old when she visited Elmhurst Ballet School in Birmingham. Anthony Madu from Nigeria received a scholarship from the school after a video of him pirouetting in the rain went viral in 2020. Good for him. You're up to date on GB News. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, Jeremy Hunt's going to deliver that spring budget today. The cost of living crisis will dominate, of course, putting more pressure on businesses and households' finances.
That's right. We expect free childcare for working parents in England will be expanded in the budget to cover 1- and 2-year-olds.
There'll also be that rise in tax-free pensions allowance, and the Chancellor is going to increase the lifetime allowance, the amount you can accumulate in your pension pot before paying extra tax.
The fuel duty is likely to be frozen for another year. The government cut the tax by 5p in March, but that's due to end on the 31st of March.
And businesses will be watching the budget because, of course, there's going to be 12 new investment zones across England, each backed with 80 million of public funding. Now, rushing into his place on the front bench today will be the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, because he's just returning from a trip to the United States, where, of course, he met President Joe Biden and the Australian Prime Minister, and they signed the deal on the AUKUS submarines. I'm delighted to say in the studio with me is the International Trade Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Nick, it's classic, very glad to have you here in the studio with us, for Labour Tories to knock the spots off each other. This is a good deal for Britain, strategically, militarily, and good for jobs.
We're very supportive of the AUKUS deal. It really is a very, very important deal. It's important, first of all, for security, specifically in the Indo-Pacific region. But secondly, this is also a very good deal for jobs here in the United Kingdom, particularly, of course, in Derby, in Barrow, in terms of the submarines now, these nuclear-powered submarines that are going to be produced as a consequence of this agreement. So Labour is very supportive of it, and indeed the next Labour government will continue to support this.
So, good relationship between Rishi Sunak and Biden, a lot better than the relationship between Biden and Boris, and also the Australian Prime Minister. Do you feel now perhaps a trade deal with the United States post-Brexit is looming?
Well, it doesn't seem to be imminent, but clearly we should be open to that trade agreement. It could be transformative. The issue really has been one of Conservative broken promises. That trade deal was originally promised by the end of last year. They also promised, by the way, that 80% of all our trade would be being conducted under free trade agreements. That promise has been broken as well.
How much are we doing?
We're in the early 60s at the moment. We're on about 63%. It's well below what was actually promised. But is it really any wonder when we've had all the chaos of the past 12 months? How on earth can you build relationships on the international stage when you've had 3 prime ministers in the last 12 months, all the different chancellors as well? So you need that stability to be able to do the hard work necessary to secure trade agreements.
Are you doing any of that work now in opposition? You've got plenty of time on your hands.
Yes, and what we are seeking to do at the moment is to build those relationships already. We, of course, are looking at coming into government, we take absolutely nothing for granted. We will fight for every single vote. But we are
miles
also
ahead in the polls. Miles ahead in the polls.
But we're also preparing so that if we come into government, we are in a position to deliver for the British people.
You're worried that polls have shown a contraction. The last poll put the Tories 11 points ahead. Now, that's a big lead for Labour, but there have been 20, 22, 23 points ahead. And Rishi Sunak is now almost even Stevens with Labour leader Keir Starmer. Has he cut through your man?
I don't think so. I do think polls will go up and down, and different polling companies, they treat don't knows in different ways and things like that. So you do end up with some variation across the pollsters. But Keir Starmer is seen very much as someone who could be the Prime Minister. It's not often that someone who hasn't held the office has the ratings that Keir does. And I think that's because people look to him to lead that change that people want. Because we're 13 years in, Andrew, to a Conservative government. Could we name any public service in a better condition now than in 2010?
Don't push me on that, because we're here to talk to you, not for me to answer questions on behalf of this lot. But what of the Labour and trust on the economy? That's always been a big problem. Wasn't helped at all by your previous Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think Labour has managed yet to seal the deal with the public, that they trust you more than the Tories on the economy?
We won't have sealed the deal with the public until the day people go into that voting booth and they put the cross next to Labour and we win a general election. That would be the point at which people have put their trust in us. But do I think we've made enormous progress since 2019 on people trusting us with their money? Absolutely, I think we've made huge strides. And that's happened because we've been extremely clear that when we make promises, we will point to where they are funded. And we've seen, if we look at unfunded promises, unfunded tax cuts, that's one of the reasons that Liz Truss's premiership collapsed so spectacularly.
Well, you can't talk. You haven't funded half the pledges you've made. Last time I read, there's a £60 billion black hole in Labour's spending plans.
There's not a black hole. The CCHQ frequently claim there is, but if you actually look at where we've made pledges, so, for example, we've talked about school breakfast clubs, expansion of the NHS workforce. We fund that with the £3.2 billion we'd raised by abolishing the non-dom tax status. It's very simple.
That one again.
It's a very simple principle. If you live in this country, you should pay your taxes here.
Bev, will you come in here? Do you trust in Labour? Do you think people have made the deal with Labour on tax and spend?
No, I don't really. I think there's a lot of people at the moment. I was just looking at the messages coming in from our viewers as well. But there's a lot of people who just feel utterly politically homeless at the moment. Completely politically homeless, because we're still smarting from 3 years of what some of us see as ridiculous pandemic policies. And all that we heard through that time, when the Conservatives were, as we now know through Hancock's messages, making decisions which weren't necessarily led by the science and the data, but by politics. All we heard from Labour was, from Keir Starmer, you're not doing enough, you need to do more, we need more restrictions, we need more furlough. Who did those people vote for in the next election?
Well, every voter, we will fight for every single vote, whatever their perspective.
Well, you need to start by apologising for what happened during the pandemic and for not holding the government to account.
I don't apologise at all for that, because we could have exploited things in the pandemic for party political reasons. There were times when the Conservatives couldn't persuade their own backbench, and we quite easily, for short-term political reasons, could have sided with the Conservatives for our own party political gain. But we didn't.
Repeatedly.
We didn't. We supported the government's central messaging during the pandemic because it was the responsible thing for us to do. If we'd started, for example, take on the public health messaging, if we'd started arguing, creating confusion on that, that wouldn't have been in the national interest to do. And at the same time, I do take issue with the argument that we didn't hold the government to account. We did hold them to account. We were the ones arguing about low sick pay when people weren't able to afford to stay at home. We were the people standing up for the self-employed, for example, who were often missed out in terms of these support schemes that were available. We were the ones arguing at an early stage around test, track and trace, that if you couldn't get a system like that into place quickly, you would end up with a longer set of restrictions. And there are cases where we were arguing...
patently not true now. You only have to look at what happened in Sweden to realise that they had a lower fatality rate than us in the fullness of time. And people like me who were watching and could see that there was a different version of events that was being played out were so frustrated with Labour for not holding the government to account, for not saying these measures are not proportionate for a disease which has such a low infection fatality rate. Those are the people you've got to win back.
But I take issue with that because, you know, and I was part of it as well. I remember I was the person speaking in the Commons when the Coronavirus Act went through. We time and time again asked the questions. We time and time again, when we had access to the scientific advice, asked those questions.
You were asking the wrong scientists. You were asking one lot of scientists. And the Great Barrington Declaration and those particular immunologists who were widely discredited had a different version of events and nobody listened to them. And now we know why. Now we see this budget. This is a post-lockdown budget. This is why we've got this massive hole we have to fill.
But well, look, I'm not saying that there aren't impacts we have to deal with. We've argued, for example, for funding for a proper school catch-up plan, which I think is absolutely necessary. But look, we will have now, Heather Hallett will preside over the full inquiry that's going to take place on this, and we will have a judgment as to whether the most appropriate decisions were made, and we will see that. But Labour was motivated by the national interest during that period.
I have to ask you one more question, by the way, because we've got another question, and I hope you can stay with that. Should your colleague, the Shadow Culture Secretary, Lucy Powell, apologise for saying in Parliament that what happened to Gary Lineker, a popular man being suspended by the BBC, was like being in Putin's Russia? Deeply offensive when you consider Putin persecutes people, has people murdered, homophobic, and is conducting an illegal invasion of Ukraine. Should she apologise?
And I've not seen, and I wasn't, I understand it maybe in the Commons, I wasn't there to see what precisely the context was, but look,
you didn't
in terms
know.
of our...
You didn't know what she said?
In terms, I don't know the specific context, but in terms of my abhorrence for Putin, and indeed that view is across party. There is a consensus across Parliament, both from benches, all parties, in condemnation of what Putin has done, and indeed the regime that
So should she apologise?
I would need to see the specific context.
I don't think you're going to answer that, but you've done your best. Look, that's Nick Thomas-Sims. I think he's going to stay with us a bit.
Thanks, Nick. Right, we've also got in the studio with us now the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisers under President Trump, Tyler Beck-Goodspeed. Tyler Beck-Goodspeed, if that's not the most American name I've ever heard, I don't know what is. It is great to see you, and thank you so much for coming in. Give us a broad analysis. What is the state of politics in America at the moment? Biden is a joke, as far as we're concerned.
Yes.
Just a moment ago, Andrew, and I was struggling to remember his name. Now, we see him do that an awful lot, but the reason we don't remember his name is because he's not remotely impactful, other than for people to express despair at how incompetent he appears to be.
Well, I think the state of the political economy in the US right now is one in which inflation is increasingly dominating the conversation because we've let the inflation problem persist for long enough that now it's become embedded in expectations. And one thing in my own research that I found is that when inflation is low and stable, consumers don't really pay attention to it very much. But once you let inflation get above sort of 3.5%, then suddenly they're reacting rationally to recent inflation news. They're incorporating it into their expectations. And I think that the Biden administration made a big problem that 11 months into an economic expansion that was already underway, they embarked on a fiscal stimulus of $1.9 trillion. That was equal, purely deficit finance, that was equal to 10% of the annual output of the entire United States economy. And that is why we immediately, in March, April 2021, we saw a surge in inflation. And then we then piled on top of that quite a few $100 billion worth of additional subsidies, which poured fuel on the flames.
What about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse earlier this week? Or end of last week? What does that mean for the American economy? Here, our Chancellor stepped in and he seems to have helped those British companies that were invested in that. What are the impacts of that in America?
Well, it remains to be seen. That was a badly run bank, and there was a run on a badly run bank. We actually saw a similar playbook in the early 1980s, when similar situation, we had high inflation and the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker was jacking up interest rates. There were several banks that were badly run. They got caught out. And what the feds did then was pretty much what they just did now, which was they stepped in, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation took over the bad institutions. And in most cases, not only did they safeguard the deposits of federally insured depositors, they also protected, by various mechanisms, the uninsured depositors as well. And I think this is what we've seen with Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank.
What everybody watching wants to know is Donald Trump going to be the next president of the United States?
I would probably, you look at the prediction markets, you look at the polling, I think he's the front runner for the Republican nomination. And if he's the Republican nominee, then I think it's
in the studio, I can feel
chance.
cringing next to me is still Nick Thomas-Simmons, who's the Shadow International Trade Secretary. How would Labour react to the prospect of another Donald Trump American administration?
Well, look, our sister party is, of course, the Democrats, but whoever the American people choose as their president in the next presidential election, there will be a very close transatlantic relationship.
But what would you think about Donald Trump winning again? Come on, give us your gut instinct.
Well, look,
I can't believe you could bear a second of it.
If I was voting, I'm obviously someone who would be a Democrat, but the transatlantic relationship is so important and so precious. It is about much more than any single leader of either country. It's a deep historic relationship and it will endure.
I mean, look, he, on a personal level, of course, Donald Trump had a huge amount of criticism, but particularly often from women and ethnic minorities that didn't like a lot of what he stood for. Then, for me, the pandemic happened and all politics went up in the air, right and left went up in the air, and everybody sort of landed in either sort of libertarian or more kind of authoritarian view of the world. The situation in America now, does it play into the hands of Donald Trump more and the Republican Party, coming off the back of the greater state and the idea that the state could tell you to stay at home and not see your loved ones?
To be honest, I think that there is a lot of and increasing nostalgia for the presidency and policies of Donald Trump. Think about it. Under three of the past four presidents, Vladimir Putin invaded sovereign countries. There was one president under whom he did not invade a sovereign country, and that was President Trump. Furthermore, we heard a lot of criticism of Trump trade policy during the 4 years of the Trump administration for some of the 301 tariffs on China, plus the steel and aluminum tariffs, which were undertaken for national security reasons. Protectionism under the United States has increased since Donald Trump left the White House. The Biden administration has imposed hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies. That is protection. And they have also carpet-bombed U.S. legislation with Buy American provisions. And furthermore, I have also heard from a lot of counterparts in the UK that whereas we were making great progress on a U.S.-UK trade agreement, and my former colleague, Bob Lighthizer, was working very well with the then Trade Minister, Liz Truss. That is basically on ice now.
Right. Well, there we are.
Isn't it?
Yeah. We've got to move on, I'm afraid.
I didn't even get to ask you about Ron DeSantis and what a hero he is. He is a hero, isn't he?
I think Florida is a model for the rest of the country.
Hear, hear. And the world.
Under DeSantis.
Right, thank you guys, both of you. Still to come. A third of workers would quit if forced back into the office. We'll be in the studio to talk about this with the founder of Pimlico Plumbers, Charlie Mullins, and New Statesman columnist.
And my nemesis, Kevin Maguire, in his shiny Marks and Spencer suit. You won't want to miss this. This is To The Point on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. It's 10:27. You're with To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Small businesses across the UK, they're very nervous about this budget today. They're calling on Jeremy Hunt to save them from the cost of living crisis.
Many owners of small businesses fear that they'll be forced to close this year due to the rising costs.
Our economics and business editor, the one and only Liam Halligan's in the studio. Liam, look, you and I, as hacks, have been in that front row of the gallery in Parliament for the budget. How much of this... I mean, there's going to be about one thing we don't know about. And I was going back in the history, I was talking to Nick Thomas-Simmons, who was with me earlier from the Shadow Cabinet.
Good interview.
And he's an historian. He's written a very good book on Harold Wilson. He reminded me, in 1947, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Harry Dalton, was sacked because he told a reporter on a paper called The Star about a couple of tax cuts which got into the stop press on the back of the paper, seen by about 3 people, lost his job and his entire career. Look at him now.
Hugh Dalton. I remember when we were young cub reporters, Andrew. Well, I was young anyway. And remember...
Harsh.
The Sun got hold of... Harsh. The Sun got hold of part of Gordon Brown's budget. There was some massive inquiry, and the whole budget was eclipsed by the fact that some of it had been leaked. Well, now it's... Basically, they're standing on a megaphone on a street corner in Whitehall telling us what's going to be in the budget. It's like a public relations exercise rather than a serious...
And they're massaging public opinion, aren't they?
They're massaging public opinion. They're also trying to massage financial markets. I don't think financial markets like this. If there's this much news management around what's meant to be quite a serious financial statement, particularly at the moment when financial markets have been skittish in the wake of this banking insolvency up over there in California, in the wake of the mini-budget back in September, which, of course, led to lots of fireworks on financial markets. This is not good. The people orchestrating this rollout of the budget news, I would say, they think they know about politics, but they don't know much about economics and financial markets.
Do you think there's going to be... what we all want to know, is there going to be a white rabbit?
I don't think there'll be a rabbit out of the hat, and I think Jeremy Hunt will try and make a virtue out of the fact that he is Jeremy from accounts. Look, we
Mr. Boring.
We all know that the Tories are nothing if they lose their reputation for financial competence. The reputation they lost in 1992 when we crashed out the exchange rate mechanism. It took them over a decade to get that reputation back. And, of course, that decade was when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown eclipsed the Tories at the top of the political tree. And they are on vulnerable ground because of the market gyrations we've had, because of the cost of living crisis, because of a sense of financial insecurity that lots of people are feeling, because interest rates are going up, not the government's fault, but they are overseeing that. And so they will want to be dull and boring. They will want no reaction from financial markets. They will want to turn to the government's backbenchers, those Tory backbenchers that are looking for tax cuts, and say, we can't do tax cuts now. We have to be steady as she goes, boring Jeremy from accounts. And then with a big wink, they'll say, and anyway, we want to save up the tax cuts until next year, just before an election.
Oh, of course. But you see, people aren't stupid, and our GB News viewers are certainly not stupid.
Absolutely.
Because they do pick up on this stuff. This message, I'd like a government that stops lying to me. The budget does not mention paying over £6 million a day to keep people in hotels who should not be in the UK. This is an interesting one. Where is it? About what? But somebody's got in touch to say you could stop paying the money that gets paid to former Prime Ministers, about the fact that the former Prime Ministers have a kind of lifelong salary, don't they?
It's an £111,000 annual grant, plus they get a government driver and protection officer for life.
Yeah.
How much is a government car and two start jobs? It's hundreds of thousands a year.
That was Mike who said
and
that.
Liz
Thank you,
Truss
Mike.
is entitled to has got the driver and the protection officer and the car.
But will
for
she
life.
get her honours list? And are you on it?
Definitely not. But she was only Prime Minister for 49 days. It is madness, isn't it?
It is madness, isn't it? Another one, Barry has said council tax, £192 a month, energy bills, £231 a month. I hope there is something in the budget for care workers on low wages. This idea that everybody feels it, we're all feeling these individuals. It doesn't look like there is a lot for people like that.
Look, when we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis, which we are, when the tax burden, the share of our national income taken by tax is at a 70-year high, the highest since Clem Attlee at the time of Hugh Dalton, harking back to the immediate post-war era, then an awful lot of ordinary families feel really cash-strapped. That's why the Tories are breaking with their usual image by giving a bung for childcare, by saying to hard-working young couples...
Nicking Labour's clothes.
Indeed, by saying to hard-working young families, look, we're going to make childcare more accessible, we're going to extend the subsidy for childcare, 636 quid a month. That doesn't amount to 30 hours, by the way, which
No,
they say it does.
I was going to say I was wanting the detail on that.
We're going to extend that from 3- and 4-year-olds to 1- and 2-year-olds as well. Try and get a lot of young parents back to work, which a lot of young parents want to do anyway, which a lot of young parents have to if they've got any chance of getting on the housing
So that will
ladder.
go to the nursery provider, Liam, just to be clear.
That will go to the nursery provider. The subsidy goes to the nursery provider.
The private nursery.
And yet
claims
those
it back to
nursery
the
providers are being walloped with corporation tax, right?
Absolutely.
This is the thing. Corporation tax isn't just for big companies in big buildings in the City of London. You know, if you run a plumbing company, you pay corporation tax. If you run a couple of kebab shops, you pay corporation tax.
We were talking to Charlie Munn,
And
said
in
just
the
that.
end, consumers will pay that corporation tax.
Yeah.
I think that is the biggest mistake he's about to make.
All right,
First
Liam.
rise in corporation tax for almost 50 years.
Liam, thanks for that. Still to come, do we need to spend more on defence? Because we will, but it's not as much as the Generals want. But after that, we'll be talking about that with the Morning News with Bethany.
Good morning, it's 10:33. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Jeremy Hunt's first budget as Chancellor will include a major expansion of childcare support, aiming to increase the workforce and boost financial growth. There are reports the plan will include 30 hours of free childcare for 1- and 2-year-olds in England. The budget will include a series of other measures to deal with labour shortages, such as encouraging the over 50s, the long-term sick and disabled to get back to work. Announcements on benefits reform and pensions allowances are also expected, but it's understood the Chancellor will resist calls from Tory backbenchers to cut taxes. As part of today's announcements, the Treasury has confirmed the energy price guarantee will be extended for a further 3 months. The support with energy bills will continue from April to June at its current level. It means average annual household bills will stay capped at £2,500 per year. Thousands of workers are walking out on what could be the biggest strike day this year. Teachers, junior doctors, tube drivers and BBC journalists are taking industrial action over issues including pay, jobs, pensions and conditions. Schools Minister Nick Gibb is urging the National Education Union to pause the strike action so serious negotiations with the government can go ahead. And the Defence Secretary says Moscow should respect international airspace after Russian jets collided with an American drone over the Black Sea. Ben Wallace says the Americans think the incident is very unprofessional, with the White House accusing Russia of recklessly colliding with its drone. The incident raises fears of an escalation between the two superpowers, with a senior Russian figure calling it a provocation. You're up to date on TV, DAB digital radio, tune in and online. This is GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
We're a little incensed here this morning. We're debating this budget that's coming in this month and we're wondering what's in it for you. Let us know, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You are with To The Point on GB News. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. We've both just got a fresh cup of tea. We need it this morning. Our blood is slightly boiling from the budget, and we're
I think
just
it's
not.
my first cup of tea, not a fresh one.
Is that your
No
first one?
complaint. No complaint. Mark, you're not having one.
Yeah.
You've got to save yourself.
I've got to wait for mine for later.
You do.
Yeah, you do. Mark Longhurst is with us. This is To The Point on GB News. If you're listening on the radio, it's me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce. Mark, you're taking over from 11. You're giving us a short day today.
So
That's very good of you.
It's all right for some, isn't it? Yeah.
What are you going to be doing?
I can reveal exclusively, this is a GB News breaking news.
Right.
We are going to be at the Happy Toadstool Toddler class in Hertfordshire with Lisa Hartle, because this actually is one of the rabbits that clearly the Chancellor's pulling out of the hat in terms of this
we can't work out, Mark, if it was supposed to be the rabbit out of the hat today, or did it leak yesterday, or did they leak it yesterday?
Or is there another? Is this just the gerbil and there's another rabbit waiting to come out of the hat later on corporation tax? But also, we're going to be at the Chatty Chums Lunch Club in Gravesend with Hio Chikomba, because, of course, it's the pensioners as well.
You really know how to live.
I know. So we're taking you to Gravesend, we're taking you to Hertfordshire, we're going to be in Glasgow with Tony Maguire covering the hospitality sector. That may take some time.
Yes, I have questions for that hospitality sector.
Manchester with Sophie Reaper, Will Hollis and Kettering at a hairdresser's, a butcher's. Not sure about the candlestick makers. We're going to be everywhere, because it's not just, obviously, what the politicians are saying in Westminster. It's how it's going to be affecting.
And the point is, it's serious, Mark. How does this impact viewers, listeners to GB News? How is it going to affect them in the pocket in all sorts of ways?
Yeah, because clearly they're going to try and deliver this as a budget for growth. But, you know, what's going to be the cost for getting that going, and where does the investment happen? And is it going to really help in the short term this cost of living crisis? Because clearly we've got the extension on the extra 3 months on fuel, which is going to make things easier.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are asking, when am I going to be better off? When am I going to be feeling better off? And in terms of getting a bit of confidence in
and people are just getting their council tax through. Mine just came through. It went up by the maximum amount. Thank you, Camden in North London.
Rail fares just gone up. Every season ticket's gone up, if they can get to work because of the strikes.
Still strikes. Took Bev about 9 hours to get here today. I think in fact she set off last week to get here today.
It did. It took me about 90 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
But you know, London is broken at the moment, and I'm sure there are lots of other cities around the country that feel like this. But London is particularly, as our capital city, nothing works. The tubes are on strike. The roads are full of roadworks.
Well, I'll tell you who else is on strike
No
today.
one's ever working on the roads.
It's the civil servants who are supposed to be delivering the details of the budget.
All notice.
Yeah.
Civil servants on strike, all frankly notice.
Well, actually, I mean, Mark Swatka saying that he's got, of his members, and this is actually quite interesting.
He's the Civil Service Union.
Civil Service Union, PCS. He's got 40,000 of his members actually receiving in-work benefits because their pay is so low, which is actually quite interesting.
Well, why do they keep going on strike then? How does that help?
Well, clearly he is indicating that, you know, it's across the board in terms of quite senior staff who had a 2% pay increase. And he's saying, look, food inflation, 16%. Do the numbers for yourself.
They did a big march in London a few Fridays ago. As some Tory MPs commented, it's the most civil servants we've seen in London since the pandemic.
At the same time, back to work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mark. You'll be here
yes,
in just
I'm
about
write
15
a
minutes.
few more notes.
Just over. You've been getting in touch. Kim says about childcare, one of the areas of concern is hospitality. Work in the sector often requires evening and late hours. Not aware of childcare providers offering hours that would support that. I completely agree, Kim. It's such a good point. And Leah said the damage to businesses in paying a comparatively additional 30% in the corporation tax will do the opposite intended, which is to hit growth. It is a major change directly against small businesses and the SMEs.
Now, the Prime Minister's vowed to increase defence spending. That presumably is going to be in the budget too, by £5 billion over the next 2 years because of the course of the growing hostility in the big wide world. We're joined now by the Evening Standard's defence editor, Robert Fox. Robert, can we ask you first of all, not about the spending, but the drone that was tipped down by the American drone that was tipped down by a Russian plane. How worried should we be by that?
I think quite worried. The consensus is with these two Russian aircraft, they were obviously on a mission, but it was sheer incompetent flying. And that's where I think we could be in real trouble. If we have acts of incompetence like this, it could trigger a confrontation between Russia and NATO. Well, indeed, this was one. It was over international waters. Russia is trying to say, no, nothing was damaged and so on, and that it was bad guidance by the drone pilots. I think I'm very sceptical about it, but then the Americans have revealed this is far from the first time that this has happened. It's a warning. It's a hint of how this can spread. I think, by the way, it's going to pay very, very big into the hotting up election campaign already for the White House in 24 in the US, because you have Ron DeSantis saying, oh, we should have nothing to do with Ukraine and Russia. It's a regional war. Oops, there's a thing called NATO involved, and there's a thing called a leadership of NATO, which is undisputably the US. And I think that it's a little storm cloud blowing up that could hint a lot of trouble to come.
Robert, this figure of £5 billion increase in defence spending from Rishi Sunak over the next 2 years, I know that numbers in the last sort of 3 years have become like Monopoly. We talk now in terms of trillions, which was a number you never particularly used to hear. £5 billion doesn't sound like that much. Is it enough?
Well, no. If you ask Ben Wallace, no, it's not enough, because he wanted twice that amount. But he wanted twice that amount for a problem that they're going to have to address, which is reform of the shape of the armed forces, but particularly the army. A lot of things have gone wrong, and a lot of things have gone right with the army, and I think that we have to say that. But post-Afghanistan, post-Iraq, the army, for example, and all services, all five of them, if you can lump them all together with space and cyber and so on, are being asked to do so much more, but so much which doesn't get into the public eye, which is about public security. You've talked about the hike in the cost of food and food imports. That is a big security question. The security of supply, of communication, of fuel, of energy, and of food.
I think many people feel these days, and it's particularly what I say to my children, because actually a lot of young people are very worried by the concept of war now in a way that they haven't been until recent times. And I reassure them and say, a war that you imagine that you learn about in school won't come back to these shores. It's all cyber war now. It's cyber security is what we have to worry about. I'm not being entirely honest with them when I say that, am I?
No, you're not, as we have seen in Ukraine. But you're also right about the war with a different face. And I say with a different face, but the content, the essence of war, it sounds rather pompous to say this, but it goes back, it is the same. It is people conflicting and trying to destroy and kill each other. And unfortunately, we have got a contest between the UK and its, with its allies on its side and Russia, which really is getting at our livelihoods. Very strange.
OK, Robert, we're going to have to break in there, Robert. That was Jeremy Hunt driving into the Commons in his chauffeur-driven car, a long way from the Treasury. Of course, security means he's escorted in. We previously saw him outside the Commons with that iconic photograph, clutching that red briefcase with all the budget secrets, most of which have been displayed all over the media in the last few days.
Not really secrets, are they?
No secrets.
Robert Fox, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sorry we had to cut you off there. Obviously, it is a big day for just joining us. It is budget day. Nice to see you, Robert. So we will be bringing you the budget, of course, as we said, at 11 o'clock. We've got the spring budget today. Cost of living crisis continues, placing pressure, businesses, household finances, etc. And we've now got our guests back in the studio.
As Bill, my old mate Kevin Maguire, star of the Daily Mirror and the New Statesman, and of course Charlie Mullins still here from Pimlico Plumbers. Kevin, I can remember, we've been talking about there's no budget purdah anymore. All these secrets are all in the papers. What year was it you broke the entire contents of the budget? You were handed the whole thing by a source.
Yeah, it was 1996. Was it? And, Ken Clarke was furious.
So that would have been his last budget?
Yeah, and he was coming up with a 1p income tax election bribe, because the election was going to be the following spring. He went off for a curry, and Downing Street threatened to injunct us because we had it, so market sensitive.
But that just shows in those days how market-sensitive things were and things didn't leak like they do now.
And it's completely changed. You were talking earlier, I'm not old enough to remember it, when Hugh Dalton was sacked in 1947, a couple of secrets, what has happened, beer and fags. We had the lot. 2013, I remember the Evening Standard. Newspapers and TV stations used to be briefed in advance in absolute detail on the morning, and somebody put it online too early.
Right.
And George Osborne, the Chancellor, was still on his feet announcing stuff, and it appeared online in the Standard. So those briefings ended. But I can't recall a budget being press released in this way. It's not just briefed, it is press released in advance. So what is left, if anything?
We were saying earlier, Kevin, the irony that this Conservative budget is being so warmly welcomed by the left.
By him?
By you. Why?
What they do is, of course, they brief the good bits. The little childcare, if you think that's good, extending the energy cap for 3 months. These are all good things. Maybe 45p on a bottle of wine, less so. But
you drink Mackerson. You don't drink wine. You drink Mackerson with your pork scratchings, don't you?
Nice pint.
Traditional Labour man.
Nice pint of Timothy Taylor.
There we are, you see.
Anyway.
But you're right, aren't they? They are massaging us.
Yeah, so we all think it's great, when in fact, actually, it's a bit of a do-nothing, bodgy budget, because even that rise in corporation tax, which is, Charlie, I'm sure, is waiting to get in on this, going up, 19 to 25 or 18?
Yeah, 19 to 25.
19 to 25, 18 billion will raise. Of course, that's been pre-announced. It's just coming into force now, and he's not going to stop it. But he wants to... he's really going to be Scrooge, but he wants to play Santa. It's the same with all chancellors.
Charlie, you're not very happy about the corporation tax rise, are you?
No, I think it's going to be a great budget. I mean, the childcare, the benefit of that is going to be amazing, getting people into work, increasing things in the economy, and the other end, the pension thing, where they're allowing them to not pay or work on and pay less tax. They've got to be good things to get people into work. As you know, Kevin, all our money comes from businesses like mine, sort of successful businesses, that, so we should be encouraging anything we can do to for success.
And having walked past your depot several times recently in Waterloo, near Waterloo, I can see how successful you are, the number of vans.
It's not his depot now. Keep up, he flogged it 2 years ago.
It's not yours now.
You never expect Kevin Maguire to be up to date with the news, Charlie. Charlie
There we
sold
are.
the business in October 2021.
So Charlie's the former Pimlico.
Yeah.
He's a gentleman of leisure.
Well, not quite. I mean,
you've got a few other businesses, Charlie.
Let's get back to a serious...
Well, I was going to say, talking about people who won't go to work, Charlie's one of them. A third of workers would quit if forced back into the office. What do you make of this, Charlie?
That's a load of rubbish.
Well, listen, post-pandemic, obviously, there's a lot of people came up with inventive ways of working from home. Zoom, blah, blah, blah. A lot of parents, in fact, you've been saying this morning, you support this childcare support. A lot of working parents want to have a bit of flexibility.
Of course they do, but what I'm trying to say from a business point of view, load of rubbish, worst thing that ever happened. We're suffering now. Generations of people don't want to go to work. The way we're going, and then they're talking about a 4-day a week. You know, I mean, if it was up to Kevin, we'd be back to 3-day a week and...
Back? When did we have a 3-day week?
Back in the 70s.
Oh, you're going back then?
Yeah.
When the Tories were in power then.
Teddy wasn't a proper Tory.
And the country was terribly run.
Of course. We need people to go to work, and we need to get the economy going to allow for things to go forward. I mean, you'll agree with me.
There's a difference between, say, working a 4-day week and working from home. Even at the height of the pandemic, a majority of people didn't work from home. The Office for National Statistics came up with a report. Only 1 in 4 did, 3 in 4 didn't. Because a lot of jobs you can't. There's almost a class divide on whether you can work at home or not. Because if you're doing anything with your hands, you're in transport, you're in hospitality. At the beginning of the pandemic, I got a flight, and the pilot said, "You'll be pleased to know I'm not working from home." and he was right. But there's also something shifted in the labour market that because there's 1 million+ vacancies, some people have got more power now, and so they can say to their employer, unless you let me work from home, if I'm a screen worker, for instance, I'm not going to work for you. And employers don't have the power to resist.
I mean, you can't have them telling you what to do.
Kevin, you know it's the knock-on effect. So Kevin and I often go to quite a nice little Italian cafe, Greasy Spoon, near the Home Office. Before the pandemic, he was selling 800 coffees a day. He had 8 staff. He's now down to 3 staff. He's lucky if he sells 150 copies a day, because all the civil servants in the Home Office, by the way, the most useless, incompetent department in Whitehall's history, work from home.
It's destroying many, many businesses, and I don't think we should be encouraged.
There'll be others that'll prosper, because if you're not getting a coffee in central London, you might be getting a coffee in the town, village, other city, other city you live in. Because you'll go out in your lunch hour, you'll go out before that, you'll go out after.
And the thing is, Charlie, if you go for coffee with Kevin Maguire, just take your wallet with you, because he never pays.
But you know what?
Charlie, you'd love to pay for me.
We've got this 500,000, is it 500,000 or no, 2.5 million people of working age now, of should be economically productive, who are just doing nothing, and we need to work out why.
Yeah, well,
why, Kevin?
I think they found during the pandemic and COVID, do you really want to work the way you did? And also, George Osborne, to try and inflate the economy, allowed people to access their pension pots earlier when he was a Chancellor.
Very popular policy.
Very popular. Except people are all spending it now. Now, there's going to be a problem down the line when you get your late 70s and 80s. No, I haven't, actually. As you know, I'm very careful,
Kevin,
Andrew.
Do you know the amount of job roles that are available has gone down by 10% less now for people working from home? So I think the trend is starting to change back to where it should be.
Charlie, we've just got to go to the screen.
Now, we've been putting together the People's Budget's bucket list this morning. Let's see what you've said so far. Nigel has said, sort out the energy companies ripping us off.
Hear, hear.
Couldn't agree more. Dean has said, I would like a government that stops lying to me.
Well, don't vote Labour, then.
Helen have said, I'd like to see foreign aid abolished. And
that's it, I'm afraid. But that's Kevin and Charlie, we didn't get along enough with you, but that's the end of a shorter version of On The Point today, because we've got the budget, and that's going to be all there with you today. Don't forget, Beverley and I will be back with you on Monday at 9:30. We're going to go to the headlines now with Bethany, I think. Oh, no, we're going to the weather. And
See
it's
you tomorrow.
cold.
Stay with us.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office with me, Annie Shuttleworth. It will be feeling much colder than yesterday today through this afternoon, and rain will push eastwards, and that's going to be pushed by this low pressure out in the Atlantic, pushing these weather fronts across the UK for this afternoon. And as that weather front falls into the colder air already in situ across the UK, we will see some heavy rain and some snow. So that we've had a cold and sunny start across eastern areas. Some areas of Yorkshire and Scotland got down to -9 last night, but it's going to be turning much wetter through the day. We've got rain warnings in force for parts of Northern Ireland through this afternoon, as this rain could turn quite persistent through this afternoon. With a lot more cloud around and that rain, it's going to be feeling colder than yesterday, many areas staying shy of double digits. And then the rain will push up into parts of northern England and Scotland, bringing some snow through this evening and tonight. So some disruption on the roads, particularly across these northern areas overnight and into the early hours of Thursday morning. Further south, it'll turn drier through the second half of the night, but quite breezy with a brisk southerly wind. So that does mean it will be milder than last night. Then through the rest of Thursday, an improving picture through the day, but at least to start there will still be some pretty heavy rain around, particularly across Wales and northern parts of England and southern Scotland, where there's further rain warnings in force until the early afternoon. Then by the afternoon, we could see some sunshine starting to break out across Northern Ireland, though there will be some hefty showers around. And with that southerly breeze, it will feel milder by day, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Then through the evening, or tomorrow evening, we'll see a lot of cloud around and a brisk breeze and some showers here and there. Through the rest of the week and as we head to the weekend, it's staying unsettled, but it will continue to feel fairly mild, at least to start. I'll see you later.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.